if this group of people had not come together at this time in Waco's history, I still think Tom Wilson's story would just be out there lingering.
Oh, totally.
It would. I just don't think the city would have. There's just not, like, our city just is not kind of in that mode. It's like we want to forget about the past,
Yeah, let's carve what we think it needs to be.
Right there, and there would have been no impetus to start telling the story.
No.
So there's no reason to believe that if we hadn't come together to tell the story at this time, that anyone else for any other reason would have come along to tell the story.
Well, I think that's how things in the city happen for the most part, is that they don't go out and recognize anyone until a group is like, hey.
Creates the
It's
Right.
like, hey, what about this person? We haven't talked about them. And then they're finally like,
But what I am thrilled to know was that Bob Dylan was at his funeral. See, before all this, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And that's amazing. And that he
is
had a
really-
funeral in LA and a funeral here, or
Yeah, that's
burial
pretty
here.
fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, you're somebody if Bob Dylan shows up to your dang funeral.
Seriously though.
I see a storm rolling through. The tops of the trees are swaying like the ocean waves. I see a storm rolling through, baby, when you're near.
From Keep Waco Loud and Rogue Media Network, this is Invisible Icon. I'm your host, Travis Scott, and today I'm here with the team of executive producers. We have Katie Selman, Jacob Green, Lindsay Littman, and Zach Burke here to talk about the making of the show Invisible Icon. If we could just start by kind of going around the table and talking about everyone's role in the creation of the show. Lindsay, would you start us off?
Well, I already had Tom Wilson on my mind, so it was almost like Katie introduced me to the project of the podcast, and I said, oh my God, yes, I know all about Tom Wilson, and I already have this interview with Michael Hall with Texas Monthly, and I'll give that to you. And I didn't know I was going to be an executive producer. I was just,
It was
going
a natural
to,
fit for you, Lindsay.
Well, I appreciate that y'all allowed me to tag along, but I was happy to share all of the information that I had found so far. But there was such a mystery at the beginning, and that was really part of the intrigue that I had with all of this. And so Katie said, yeah, we're doing this podcast. Let's work together. And so I felt like my part was just kind of information gathering and interview gathering. And when I got that phone call, because Zach gave me the number to Tom Wilson III, and then I kind of low-key harassed him. Or like low-key.
He did call you the lion.
Light
Right.
harassment.
So we have like several levels in journalism when we're trying to approach someone, and you do catch more flies with honey. And so I kind of was circling him a little bit, like, emailing his work and then calling his work and then, leaving a message. And then when he did finally call me back, he told me he had read my bio, and so I was glad that he didn't think that I was just some like crazy person off the street, that I actually did have a purpose, which I appreciated, because I didn't escalate it, because when you escalate, you have to actually door knock and then show up to their work, which I was willing to do to get the story. But it was one of the greatest moments for me was getting that phone call and seeing that it was a Houston number, and I was at work, so I ran into the audio booth, and then afterward, I was sweating. I was so excited to just hear what he had to say. And I had so many questions. And so that initial contact with him, I think, just kind of snowballed for all of us into being able to get most of our questions answered.
Here's just a funny story I want to tack onto that, because when you got him to call you back and you texted us, we all went crazy of just like, oh, she got it. I remember that it was like an afternoon and we had people over at our house, and you sent the text with the audio, and I stood up and I left the living room and my wife goes, where are you going? And I go, Lindsay just got Tom Wilson III. And I left in the other room immediately to go listen to it because I was just so taken back from it.
Well, and I did not have high hopes for being able to talk to him, mainly because I had just interviewed Michael Hall a couple years before, and he wasn't able to hear back from him. So I was worried that maybe we'd never know the rest of the story.
Yeah, and I think that, I remember the phone call when Lindsay called me, and she's like, are you sitting down? And I just remember being like, I have no idea what's about to come out of her mouth, and just, it didn't seem real. You know what I mean? Like, it didn't seem real, but also I just remember us having conversations before we even started recording saying, like, what happens if we tell this story and it just ends up being sad, you know?
Yeah,
like,
it turns out not to be a good guy.
Or there's just like a bunch, like an open-ended, like, you know, this kind of helped us feel good about the story we already felt good about.
I definitely will say from the position of being the narrator of the story, I was concerned at the very beginning when we started telling a story that we didn't know the end of. And so when Lindsay was finally able to get a hold of Tom Wilson III and we had the end of the story, then at that moment, I mean, I just felt such a huge sigh of relief that it was like, okay, we know what we're doing. We're telling a good story, and we're on a good path now.
Absolutely.
No, I totally agree with that. And it was one of those things that when we were piecing it together, like we knew we had enough 4 episodes. Like we had so much information to get out there. It was just the spacing of, all right, what goes where? How are we going to make this last? And then, yeah, the ending like you talked about, because at the time all we knew was, hey, he passed away this time and nothing else. But when we were able to get T3 on board, then that added so much to it of us being able to finally, find the way to perfectly end that. Like we had that end cap piece we were looking for. Right,
absolutely. Zach, could you talk a little bit about your role in the podcast and sort of helping get this whole thing off the ground?
I guess it started like, Jacob, 2-3 years ago? It's been a while.
It's 1 year.
No. Really? Is that all?
Yeah.
See,
it feels like
it
dog
does.
years.
It does. Okay.
Well, maybe a year and a half at this point. It's almost October.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Okay.
The
Okay.
pandemic counts
It was-
as its own
year.
It made time
It was a
slow
couple
down.
days after my birthday and the first show that we put on
So
with
June
Brotherwell Brewing.
2019.
Oh yeah.
So
Great show, by the way.
I was recovering from a half marathon, just shamelessly plugging that one in there. And Zach emails me.
And then so like that's when it got this kicked off. But even like, I think I said 2 to 3 years because I had the idea, and I just kind of sat there and like would research more and write more and more stuff down. Because when I went, my whole goal was when I presented it somewhere, is I wanted to have enough information and enough facts that when I pitched it, I wasn't going to get told no.
Yeah.
Like I wanted to have enough of that, and I knew that there was a great story there. So I spent like a year just getting as much information, and I would go, at work during my lunch break, I would go out to my car and I would just call these guys. Like I would find numbers and, I would call, and I talked to Michael Hall there at, Texas Monthly. And then I called and talked to a random Rolling Stone reporter. The fact that he answered, I was like, hey, I know you don't know me, but this is it. And so like, that's what I did. And I just hunted down people to try to get as much info. When I had enough, then I finally sent Jacob the email, and, you guys were, over the moon about it, and which is what, I thought, hey, if I present this to people, like-minded people, they're going to see, the great story that is here. And yeah, it went from us just meeting at Dichotomy and trying to figure out what we were going to do to,
how to do the story justice was the very first.
Yes.
Yeah.
The foundation of it.
Jacob, could you elaborate a little bit more on that meeting at Dichotomy?
Yeah. So when Zach first sent that email and he had put, all the people that Tom had worked with, it was the Velvet Underground that stuck out to me instantly because I'm just a diehard fan. and a diehard Lou Reed fan, and that's what got us connected. So we started meeting and throwing out some ideas of how to do justice for this story. And I think it started off as maybe a news article, but that just didn't feel big enough. And then it kind of expanded into a movie, and which we have no idea how
That was
to
a
do
little
that.
too big right
So
now.
that turned out to be too big, but it was sort of like a chance meeting because Ty Nathan Clark, he's an artist here. He's from California, but he lives here in Waco, and he's worked on some very cool documentaries. And I just sort of tossed it at him. I was like, "Hey, man, what do you think we should do with this?" And he sort of did that Napster Mark Zuckerberg moment. He was just like, lose the. He's like, do a podcast. And we were like, yeah, okay, absolutely. Ding, 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 ding,
It was
ding.
one of those things, like, as soon as it was said, you just kind of looked and you're like, why didn't we think of that before?
Yeah. He really kind of pushed us in that direction to sort of clashing into Lindsay and Mike as well.
I'd like to add that I was late to that meeting because I was getting my hair done, and I had it. I remember distinctly
Always
that it was
with the hair with this
it
one.
was the first time I ever put any color in my hair, which it is now bright purple, but I got it rose gold that day. So I just want y'all to know that.
So that kind of sat on the back burner really for a little bit, the idea of the podcast.
Well, I remember you guys talking about it on the Keep Waco Loud podcast.
Yeah,
about the original idea of the Tom
Absolutely.
Wilson podcast.
Mhm. And it took a pandemic to sort of shut everything else down and direct our focus back to it.
To create that space.
Yeah.
So I remember being recruited to the team by Katie. Katie, can you talk a little bit about what the beginning of this process was like from your perspective?
Well, for me, you see a bunch of ideas and, different paths and different, like everybody kind of has like their own idea or their own goal or how they envision it. And one thing that I think that is kind of my superpower is kind of honing and putting, you know what I mean? Like just kind of saying like, this is what we need to do. And yeah, and I wanted to have a voice. I didn't want it to, have all these different interviews and not have somebody guiding the conversation. And I didn't think it was me. I didn't think it was anybody else that was really working on the project because I wanted it to almost be somebody coming from the outside in. And that's when I was like, it's got to be Travis Scott. And I imagined you sitting there with like a cocktail in hand, telling this story by a fire. Like that's how I imagined it happening. Obviously, that didn't happen. It's here in the studio. Or maybe it did. I don't know.
I mean,
Don't give away the
I hope
magic.
so.
He's sitting in front of a fireplace, velvet robe,
Oh, yeah.
right.
But
cognac.
I absolutely thought that you were the voice. You were my first choice to be the voice behind the Invisible Icon, and I'm so glad I asked.
Well, I was certainly flattered when you pitched the idea to me, and I remember when we first started talking about this, and it was you and Jacob, and we're saying, oh well, there's a story that we want you to be a part of. It's about this super prolific 60s rock producer, and I remember thinking, well, 60s rock isn't really my thing, but I'm always down to learn something new. And they said, oh, and also he's from Waco, and I was like, okay, well that's really interesting. And they said, oh, and also he graduated from Harvard, and I was like, okay, well, that's exciting to get a Waco guy from Harvard. And they were like, and also he was a black guy, and I was like,
You buried the lead.
His mind exploded.
I'm sorry. Can we walk through all of those things again, just so I'm hearing this all correctly? And so, going from first, being invited to be on the show to when we got to the first episode. The first episode was just packed with content, and I was amazed at how much stuff was in there. And I remember sitting in the studio with producer Mike and going through as I was going through and reading through and revising episode 1, trying to find supporting information on the names that we brought up or the dates that we brought up, and every time we stumbled upon another name or another date, Mike are just sitting here blown away by the wealth of information that was around it. And so when I've talked to people about it, including my own mother about it, and we're telling a story of this amazing this amazing African American producer. Born in the 30s, so he's 2 years older than my grandfather. But he was college educated, went to Harvard. Both of his parents college educated. His grandfather college educated and graduated from college in Illinois, which was not a black college, in the year where the Supreme Court decided it's okay to segregate schools. So all of the stuff leading up to the to having Tom Wilson Jr. entering the story was just absolutely mind-blowing.
And part of that, just to tag on what Travis did, was part of the favorite thing that I got to kind of like dig away at was that family story. Like, we knew, and we obviously, dove into every aspect of Tom's life with this podcast. And I think we did a great job of covering everything. But then for me also, on top of what we learned there, was the fact that we were able to go back and see this about his parents, to see this about his grandparents, and
That was really special.
Yeah, and just to see how the family as a whole, like, sure, Tom Wilson Jr. is a fantastic guy who deserves credit, but I look at that family as a whole as like, that's a damn good family right there, just all the way.
Impressive unit.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
I think it's that they found a blueprint for success in its education. And I think every child who's growing up in Waco, Texas, or anywhere in this country, if they're growing up in a world of social, racial injustice, if they're growing up in a world where their socioeconomic status is low, education. That's what I walk away with.
Absolutely.
That, but he also was extremely talented.
Oh, that's true.
And
And
very
charming.
smooth. And
Definitely
I see
helps.
a lot of similarities when I listen to the episodes of The Music Factory to his delivery and to Travis's delivery.
Oh.
It was great.
He's blushing.
Really,
I'm
just
blushing.
that
blushing.
low, smooth voice. I really enjoyed listening to Travis.
Well, can we talk about the process? Because I want to get Mike obviously involved in this, the process that we're taking from day 1 to day 7 finished products.
And I'd also like to hear what Mike like when we presented it to Mike. Like, what did you think about it?
So I think Jacob said something to me at a open mic, and this was way pre-pandemic and all that stuff.
Right.
But we talked about it then, and I was super excited just because I like doing that sort of stuff with like a digital soundscape and all that. I've done some of that stuff in the past and really enjoyed just kind of storytelling through audio. Travis and I, when we met for the first one, we had no idea what we were doing.
I'm pretty sure we were in the studio for about 2 hours.
Yeah, we were here for a while.
That probably the last 30 minutes of it was recording.
Yeah. Yeah, the other stuff was just us figuring out what the hell do we put where, and what do we cut out, what do we leave.
Also, me being a diva and trying to figure out.
Well, I didn't want to say that, but
It's okay. It's okay. We can admit it. So.
no, it's I'm thrilled to be a part of it. It's a hell of an experience to get all of that information and have to compress it into an episode within a week.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if you guys know this or not, but I produced like 400 shows or something at this point.
At least.
And so that one was always, that's my Saturday and Sunday, and that sort of thing. It got easier as we went along.
Sure, as we built that template.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. Once the template had been built, then it's just, where do we come in? Where do we come out? How do we weave? We had to play around with Travis's voice a lot too, because I know at first, I think our first feedback on all this stuff was that Travis needed to read it more like a storybook. I think somebody said.
Right.
Yeah, I think that was Lindsay.
I definitely remember going through reading. I think remember recording the first one twice and then going back and listening to the episode, and then Mike and I both decided collectively that I should probably come in and record it again in a,
And read a little faster.
in a way that sounded a little more narrative.
Well, and Travis has this voice that he takes these natural pauses anyway. So it was very easy for me to cut, a little more, a little less, that sort of thing. And the nature of the beast and something like this is you've got the backing music and stuff all the time anyway, so it's never just this empty silence unless it's warranted. And there were a couple of times that empty silence was warranted because the story in and of itself, yes, it's a happy story, but it doesn't end well, I mean, it ended early. bad stuff happened, but a celebration of this guy's life is what it should be seen as a whole.
Absolutely.
There are pieces in there that are very sad, and there's even pieces. We did a moment of silence in one, Travis.
Remembering
Lewis.
Congressman
Yeah.
John Lewis.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was very apt to do that during recording this. So I've had a blast. I hope that we get to do other legends or icons or something down the road.
Absolutely.
I think this one should stand on its own for a while.
For sure.
Agreed.
Because I 100% honest with you, numbers stunk at first because nobody knew what they were listening to.
Right.
But this thing has started to build.
That's
and
awesome.
this is one of those stories that as it sits out there, it just germinates, and I think people will find it. I think if the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame thing happens, we'll be right up there with Marshall Crenshaw.
Oh, it'll happen.
Nice.
I think
It
so.
will happen.
It'll happen if I have to circle the wagons on that.
Who,
I
oddly
know.
enough, I seem to be email buddies with now, Mike.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
You see also in Tom and his family a lot of that in T3 and T4. T4
yeah.
is so active. If you see him on Instagram, he is all about the Black Lives Matter movement, and he's a vegan. He's very, very passionate about that and educated. And you see Tom Wilson Jr. in both his kid and his grandkid.
One thing I was hyper aware of is the fact that when you and I first started talking, I was like, are we once again white people trying to tell an African American family story? And I was very concerned about
Yeah.
that.
Sure.
Definitely.
I didn't want to speak out of place or do something that maybe
Hijack
somebody
the
else should be.
narrative.
Exactly. I was very aware of that. I mean, Travis,
And-
you are the only black person involved in this project.
Right.
What are your thoughts about that?
So, whenever I first got the script for each episode, I would sit down and go through it and analyze it in a way that to make sure that we weren't entering that territory of trying to tell the story in a way that doesn't effectively glorify the story. And so that was a lot of, like I said, episode 1 that was here in the studio with producer Mike. For all the other episodes, that was me at home the day or two before, bracketing out the episodes so that they can be phrased properly and going in and making tweaks here and there. And so yeah. But overall, I felt very comfortable telling the story and telling a story that I was not writing. And with the information and the way that this team put all the stories together, I felt comfortable
Well,
being able to tell the story.
let's talk about the process then, how it starts, because it starts with Zach.
Yeah.
Zach sends the outline.
I go through and, we have a meeting. We had a meeting at the beginning of it, and we discussed, all right, episodes 1's going to be this, 2's this. And so we had an outline of what we were going to do. So I got up, and it depends on how my week went, but I'll, hopefully get up on Monday, and I will sit down in front of my computer. And I have basically, to the right, years that I'm covering, and then I just dive in. And I'm writing everything down and typing it up. And this could be like a 3 or 4 hour process because I know that I want to give Jacob as much as I possibly can when he writes it. So after that, when I'm exhausted and my brain needs a break and I'm done with it, I can send it to Jacob. And then that's where it picks up next with Jacob writing the episodes.
The clock continues to
Yep.
tick, and then I'll take all that really great info that Zach has compiled, and he includes ideas of how he thinks the episode should go, and I just sort of try to put it into a good voice, and then kind of bring it to life, put the meat on the bones that Zach has sent over.
And the one thing I just want to add to give Jacob a pat on the back is when he was able to write the script for the little scenes we would have.
Oh yeah.
My brain can't, if you tell me, hey, what is this or why is this? If I have to just go hunt down and find an answer, that's me. But I could not put that together. And so I would send what I have, and I know Jacob talking about it, and I'd be like, man, I hope there's enough in there for him to pull something out of. And then I'd listen to the episode when Mike would send it to us, and I'd be like, damn, he knocked it out of the park. All right.
Yeah, and that was like a 1-2 punch between me and then Travis kind of tweaking it. I certainly had some grandiose ideas in certain episodes, and then once that got to Travis and Mike, they really made it come to life.
And so when the script gets to me, I will say that Jacob definitely sends the script out with plenty of time or plenty of advance notice.
Uh-oh.
And I
This is going.
That was sarcasm.
no, that was not sarcasm. Jacob always sends it out with plenty of time for me to get to it. I would read the script 1 or 2 days before recording.
Sure.
And so I would go through and just make some formatting changes, bracket it out so that it was easier to phrase, and then go through and look at if we bring up a date, what information can we throw in there about the date, or
What else can
if
we glean from
we
that?
bring up another person or another location, is there some connection that we can put in here to tie it to what else is going on. And so I would go in and insert some information like that, rearrange some phrases, and then when I was, by the time I get to the studio to record it, normally that is the first time that I'm reading the whole story start to finish out loud. And so if there are moments of surprise that you hear in my voice, it is genuine surprise because I am also learning this information right now
That has to be
as
my
it's being recorded.
Favorite part about the entire series is that Travis is genuinely surprised at things.
It's the learning things as they come. And so, at the beginning of the story, it was I was comforted to know that we knew the direction the story was going. We knew how the story ended, and we were comfortable telling the story. But all of the details in the middle, when I get to an episode and say, on the next episode of Invisible Icon, we're talking about the following things, I'm also sitting there thinking, man, I wonder what we're going to talk about about the next things. So.
What was everybody's favorite moment?
I really wanted to talk
That's
about
why
that.
we're sisters, Katie.
So my absolute favorite moment was when we got to hear Tom Wilson Jr.'s voice for the first time. And he was just all about himself, talking about how great he was. And I remember listening to it being like, yes, Tom, you are great. You are the best. No one is better than you. I agree with you. I just got so hyped up.
I was
in that
also
moment.
loved that moment. when,
It's mine too, because he's just going on and he's talking about things put on through history. And he's like, I could have done what they did in Rome better.
Right.
I could have done this better. Yeah. Like, the only other ideas that have happened that aren't being me, it's because I don't have time to pursue them. And I listened to the whole thing, and I'm
Fantastic.
like, this is the greatest, just not taking yourself too seriously,
Yeah.
but brag at the same time. Yeah. And I just absolutely loved it. I think that's my favorite quote from the whole thing, too.
Oh, I started listening on my commute. I started listening to every single episode of The Music Factory. And I was like,
They're so good.
Yeah,
so
they
freaking
really are.
good.
And that was part of the beauty, too, of when I would write these. Especially with the Velvet Underground episode or other ones we did. If they talked about the artists that we covered, I'd listen to the whole, the whole show, and I could get audio from them telling Tom himself about what, Lou Reed and John Cale were doing with Tom. It was, but
Absolutely.
those episodes are so great. The songs that are in between there, the old school ads, the Gone for the Wind ad comes on so many times, and it's so big and so sweeping.
And everybody loves Nico. Let's keep
Yes.
her just as she is.
We're gonna keep her special.
Yes, all those. I
It's
love.
what is going on? What are you guys doing to
Was
Nico?
Gone with the Wind the parachute sheets of podcasts?
I
How
don't-
every podcast
Seriously,
is
yeah.
parachute
Oh,
sheets.
it was, but it was just for the first time in 35 years, and you're like, wow, okay.
You know what I loved? I loved hearing. I had so many favorite moments. In fact, every time you guys would send the preview of the episode, my fiance and I would listen to it, and we would just be like, man, this is so freaking good. It's so good. I love these deep dives. But one of my favorite things was hearing from T3 about how his dad would call his mom every Sunday.
Yeah, that was really
That
nice
was-
to find
I
Yeah,
out.
a
loved that
really
because that
endearing
just
moment.
summed up kind of who he was. It's like he went out into the world and did all these things, but he still cared about his mom and what was going on
Yeah,
back
that
home.
was probably top 3 favorite thing
Yeah.
in it. But I think for me, it was the Music Factory years and getting to do those 3 episodes, which were so dense.
Well,
with
those 4 episodes.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's 4 episodes, you're right. The 4 pillars, right. Those 4 episodes, each episode was so chocked full of just rock and roll history.
Yeah.
And it was so, like, tough, like, to choose what to not focus on and just get down to the pearl of
Yeah.
each episode. And that's probably number 2. And number 1, my favorite thing was doing the Velvet Underground episode. Because
Yeah.
I'm just a massive fan, and the little story that I told at the end of that episode that literally happened.
Yeah.
Me and Katie were in a sports bar in Brooklyn watching Dallas Cowboys play. I forget who, but there's Giants fans there, and they're all yelling at the Cowboys
Those are Buffalo
fans.
Bills.
Oh, it was the Bills. That's right. Katie verified. And like, I genuinely wept into my beer. It sounds like a country song, but it definitely happened.
There's a tear in
I
my
was,
ear.
I was gonna sing too.
So I learned so much on this show, and I loved every episode of being able to go through and read through the script and look up, like I said, looking up the background information and finding out all of the information surrounding what we were talking about, and a lot of times looking at the events that led up to certain things that were happening. But I will say that my favorite moment in the creation of this show was the moment when we posted a story to Instagram and I got a notification that Tom Wilson IV reposted the story to his
very
Instagram.
cool.
And at that moment I about lost it. So I was like, we just got a 2-generation endorsement on how we are delivering this man's life story.
Podcast with that
So,
2-generation endorsement.
I mean, pretty much. I was amazed. So that was the moment that finally did it for me.
what about Mike?
So,
I want to hear
Well-
Mike's
Oh, yeah, Mike,
favorite.
Well,
sorry.
I was going to say
Mike.
that my favorite part of this whole process was something that wasn't in any of the episodes. Before we talked to T3 again, I had to call him and just have a one-on-one conversation with him just to say, hey, is it cool that we call you again, and all that kind of stuff. And hearing him say that he's really enjoying it and thought it was a fitting tribute made me feel pretty good. And so being able to do that and know that, the stuff I was doing was making a difference in this man's life. So that was a big part for me. It was just some Saturday, that I talked to him, but it led to then Zach having the great conversation he had with him.
That's
And
amazing.
sorry, Mike, just since you've talked to him and Lindsay, you've talked to him too, he is the funnest person to have a phone conversation
Yeah.
with.
He's a good guy.
Literally, when I talked to him on the phone, I was like, I talk to people for a living because he and I have the same background in news. He went much higher than me. He ended up in San Francisco, but up the market chain. But he is one of the most enjoyable people to talk to on the planet.
so genuine.
Genuinely a
sounding.
nice sounding guy.
And interesting
And
and intelligent.
so
And the
interesting.
things that I started writing down the stuff he was saying because I just liked the way the words sounded together. He's such a wordsmith, and I think it is the highest compliment for him to approve and be involved in this process of telling his dad's story because it's a sacred story. It's his family story. And we're just happy to bring it to the people of Waco and whoever else might be listening out there.
Yeah, and I think jumping on top of what Mike was saying about tribute, maybe we should talk about going to the gravesite of where Tom and his family are buried. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Travis?
Yes, so it was a very sobering kind of moment, going to the gravesite with the team to honor the memory and the legacy of Tom Wilson in person. And that was, we had been working on this story for at that point, 8 weeks of actual
maybe
recording
9.
time, and then all the weeks beforehand. So we'd been on this process for a couple of months, and all of us, the ways in which we were getting to know Tom Wilson and his story and his family and his legacy, and then finally being able to meet up to, I guess, in a way, interact with the tangible memory of Tom Wilson was just a very sobering moment and a really, really cool sort of bittersweet sort of moment.
So we recorded ourselves out there. Unfortunately, Lindsay was not there, but appropriately, Lindsay was in L.A.
I was in
on
Los
the
Angeles
exact same day that Tom passed.
on the
which is-
anniversary of his death, and so
started with you, and that's just also interesting to me.
yeah, I reached out to T3 to get the exact address because I was going to go past his house, but I was already on a plane back home when I heard back. But I'd like to go out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I would also like to go out there.
Go back out there,
Same.
yeah.
So while we were out at the gravesite, we recorded a little bit of our conversation out there, and we're going to play that for you to listen to at this time.
I think it's something special that Tom's first, heartbeat was here in the heart of Texas, and his final resting place, even though he didn't pass here in LA, but his final resting place is back here in the heart of Texas. I think that's something special.
Yeah, I think it's truly amazing getting to know the story of like Tom Wilson and like the Tom and the family. And so Tom and his parents all being like honored at the same with the same gravesite. It's I think like what Katie said, we've been so invested in this story for so long. It's it's a very sobering moment.
Yeah.
And it means a lot that we are able to like also share in this moment in person with this part of the story.
Yeah, we've been celebrating Tom this whole time. Now it kind of feels like we're actually mourning him,
Yeah.
which is
Kinda.
interesting.
The thing that hits me the most as I'm sitting here and I'm staring at this is I brought it up when I talked to Tom Wilson III of how I feel honestly, aside from, brothers, mother, wife, the person I know most from all the research and stuff I've done is Tom. And so it does feel like we talked about, kind of like a friend, kind of like a family member. But then also just being able to discover not only Tom and the greatness he did, but his whole family. So like looking at this, and I've heard stories about Fanny now, and then, what she did and how big of an impact she was to Tom, how he called her, once a week to she was his therapist. Or then looking at his dad's and just, Thomas there and knowing what he went through to kind of help out the family. And, the fact that he worked for Atlanta Life Insurance and he worked downtown and then helped with his dad's rug laundry that would go on to, kind of inspire Tom in ways too. When I look at this, it's not just like I'm mourning and at the same time happy to finally be at a place where you can see, Tom and him be at rest with those he loves. But to me, the journey has also been bigger family-wise, because when I look down here now and I see Thomas B2, and I know I've talked to the third and to the fourth now. So it just kind of adds to the weight of it all of just how exactly.
I think we're kind of towards the end of the we're at the end of the series now, and we have 7-8 episodes out, and a lot of people have been like reaching out to me recently, being like, I finally started listening to your podcast. I can't believe this man is from Waco. His story is so incredible, and I feel confident that this memorial right here, at Doris Miller Park is not going to be the only memorial he's going to have, and I'm hopeful that, he's going to have a bigger legacy, in Waco.
And I think, I think it also is worth noting that most of the projects that Tom worked on, at first, they were not seen with great like critical acclaim or anything like that, and it seemed like with every project that Tom was involved in, the genius of Tom Wilson finally came out much later than the original product did. And I think in the same way, the genius of Tom Wilson's life is finally starting to come out much later than than the passing of Tom Wilson.
Something that I just thought of too is obviously we've brought up the fact and other people that the date of his death is obviously 3 years off. But at the same time, just after following, Tom's life and the type of person Tom was, everything he touched and what he was able to do and the influence he was able to have in the music industry, you expect something bigger. But at the same time, just looking at what we have here, even with the wrong date, I feel it's just what Tom would want. Like, he was one of those, because it was a way of, like, he was going to do it his way. He was going to help out musicians who wanted to do it their way. They thought that it should be this, and he was like, no, I think we can do this. Like, it fits. Like, I don't know, because obviously I never have the pleasure of meeting the man, but the stories I've told is he didn't seem like a guy who wanted a big hoopla in a way, and it makes sense that this is just him with his mom and dad. Is just kind of perfect in a sense.
So maybe kind of describe what you're seeing here.
Granite block with then a brass plaque on top of it with the Wilson in big print at the bottom, and then his mother Fanny's in the middle from 1906 to 1996. To his right is his father from 1898 to 1951, and then to the left is Tom from 1931 to 1975, and then the two vases on each side of it with beautiful flowers in it now. So it's simple, but yet hard hitting. It's and I think that's just the perfect way for it to be summed up.
Yeah, today is actually the anniversary of Tom Wilson passing away from a heart attack while he was living in LA. September 6th, 1978, not 1975. And it said that he's not buried here, but he was cremated, and his remains are somewhere in the city, which I'd be interested to know exactly where. What are your thoughts, Producer Mike?
I would love to know why the date is wrong. It's also not really a headstone, it's just a marker, which seems kind of crazy thinking about the life he had. But in another way, it's fitting, like Zach said. The guy, I think he was, when it came down to it, he was kind of understated, but he produced these enormous people. He didn't want to be front and center.
Right. He didn't need to rest on his laurels for anything.
Yeah.
It seemed to me.
So,
Like, it fits in a way of, a man who dealt with Dylan, who dealt with Zappa, who dealt with, Velvet Underground, Simon and Garfunkel, Sun Ra, all these, guys that could have bigger than life personalities and just kind of exude charisma wherever they were. And he was the guy that exuded a charisma of himself, but was able to stay back in the back and just create these wonderful sounds that it's just kind of, like we said, just...
It was a fixed point.
Yes.
In a sea of chaos.
Yes.
Creative genius chaos, which is where the most best and wonderful creative things come from. But you do need that base, that fixed point.
Thank you for joining us on this journey, and this concludes our telling of the Tom Wilson story. And again, a huge thanks to the people who helped put this podcast together, our executive producers,
Jacob Green,
Katie Selman,
Lindsay Lippman.
Zach Burke.
and I'm Mike Hamilton.
and I'm Travis Scott, and this has been Invisible Icon, the Tom Wilson story. This podcast is produced by Rogue Media Network. Our theme music is by the Bowleys. And now, we'll let Tom have the final word.
Here's one that gets us into our show a little more deeply each week. It's called our Nightmare Pick. This is the record that I, as a producer, as one of the most outstanding producers in the history, not only of the record business, but of all entertainment, ranging as far back as the great events that they used to put on at the Coliseum in Rome. I mean, I could have staged those things with much more flair than Nero or Caligula, any of those. They were pikers. And any of the things that are done today, almost any idea that you mentioned, I have thought of, but I only have so much time, so it's impossible for me to do the things that George Martin does on the one hand, while I'm thinking about the things, say, that Eric Jacobson is doing with the Sopwith Camp and so forth. So I just don't have enough time to get around to the many great ideas that constantly stir around in my mind. So you only hear, just in the few selections that do get out, you hear only some brief moment, some brief glimpse of my genius.
This has been Rogue Media Network Podcast.